Yeah. I gave you some more not sounds so you can hear it better. Well, it's a shotgun mic. It's kind of what it does. I'm getting kind of a buzzing sound from my camera. No, that's not you. It's coming from inside the camera.
Good PJ.